welcome back to my channel. If you're new, I'm Kiarna Jayne. Make sure you subscribe to join the tribe. If you are returning, welcome back to another Let's Talk episode. Today I'm going to be talking all about the truth in regards to a spiritual awakening. So whether you are on a spiritual journey yourself, or whether you have just, touched bases on what a spiritual awakening might be, or you're just curious to know what this spiritual awakening thing is about, then I am today going to be delving into a little bit more of the topics that people don't usually speak about. Now, when I first started my spiritual awakening, I was following quite a few people on social media that made this journey seem like roses, and it made the journey enhanced to be something much more, I'm going to be brutally honest, but much more positive and enjoyable than what at some points it has actually been. Because to me, a spiritual awakening is actually shaking your whole entire life. It's changing your whole perspective on the world. It's changing who you are as a person, who maybe you thought yourself to be as a person, and you're waking up to certain truths, and it can be quite painful, and it's a process that is ongoing. I know that sometimes when you class something as a journey, you almost think there's a beginning and an end, but with a spiritual awakening and with this whole self-discovery, there is never an end, and it's ongoing. It's so ongoing. And so this is the reason why I wanted to come on here and talk a little bit about the things that most people don't really talk about when it comes to spiritual awakenings, because it can be presented as this like beautiful, positive, joyful thing, and whilst it is, there are other sides to it that many people may not feel comfortable sharing or expressing as an online figure. And for me, this side to a spiritual awakening has caused some of the biggest momentums in shifting as a person and in my growth to date. So I'm going to be brutally honest. I'm going to obviously get into the details of what I have experienced and what many of my soul sisters have experienced in this journey. And that is sometimes feeling lonely, because if you think about it, when you break free from the pattern of society or the way society sees the world, you then almost break away from people as well. And you become more of this awakened version of yourself, where you see more meaning to life situations, and nothing is 3D anymore. There's always depth to something, and there's always a meaning behind something. And sometimes when you're not grounded, and when you've got a lot going on internally, it can be really, really tough to come back down to earth and really process what you're going through and the changes you're going through, because this is something that you do by yourself. When you change internally, nobody else has the ability to help you with that. It's all down to you, and that can be really, really hard when you don't feel like there's anybody else that can relate to you, or all of a sudden you're the only person out of your friendship group who is on this journey, and you start to feel somewhat alone, and loneliness can be a major factor in this. But one thing that's helped me with getting through this whole loneliness aspect of a spiritual awakening is that this is a universal thing, and this is all part of the collective awakening. And so just the fact that I myself have gone through an awakening, or am going through an awakening, is all the proof that I need that I am not alone, because if I am, then I know that somebody else is. And one thing that's gotten me through this is learning to accept change, and accept the fact that I am changing, which has allowed me to feel comfortable and more at ease with these phases that I go through, because when you resist it, it's even harder to deal with it. Because it's leaving the old behind, and it's leaving old friendships behind, and it's leaving almost like your old self behind, and that's a real it's almost like a grieving process of yourself and of past hurts and of experiences you've been through in the past, of trauma, and it can get really deep. And when you're facing this by yourself, it's almost like, you know, you are on your own, and feelings of loneliness can really overwhelm you. And if this is something that you have been going through, I just really want you to know that you are not alone. And once you start to, you know, embrace who you are and embrace the change and not see it as a negative, and not even like beat yourself up for having these really tough times, you start to open up easier ways for you to get through it, and you start to attract the right people. Last year I went on a soul pilgrimage to Glastonbury, and it was the craziest thing because I've never felt such an immense sisterhood with people that I'd never met before. So I ended up meeting with 4 girls, and immediately the connection we had was something much stronger and something much deeper than what you would have normally. And I would say that that's one of the positive side effects of a spiritual awakening. You have more authentic and you have more raw and real friendships and relationships, and that's something that is really powerful when you're going through something like this, because it is something much deeper and something that's beyond the surface level. So yeah, loneliness is definitely one of the things that I don't feel like people talk enough on, and I've realised that a lot of my spiritual friends and my spiritual people that I speak to online, we all pretty much are on our own, and even though we have contact with each other on the online world, in our real worlds we are all pretty much just doing our own things, and we don't, from what I've noticed, we are in our own company a lot of the time. And when you go through something like a spiritual awakening, it's really important to honour these moments as well, and honour the time you need to have for yourself, because there's a lot of processing that you go through, which then obviously this obviously leads me on to my next thing that I don't feel like we talk enough about when we talk about spiritual awakenings. That is having to face your shadows and face your darker sides. Because before spiritual awakening, we have these perceptions of ourselves and these views of ourselves, of what we believe we are or who we want to be, and it almost comes as like a reality shock and a hit to the ego when you actually realise that you are actually somebody different. And you know what, sometimes the truth is really hard to accept, because once you start a spiritual awakening, you start to, you know, take responsibility for everything that's going on in your life. And then that sometimes means, you know, taking responsibility of certain aspects of your personality that you wasn't necessarily wanting to accept before, or you were in denial about before. And so that can be really hard. If you've had this perception of yourself that you've always been this person, this certain person, or you've always been this way, you've been in denial about a certain aspect of your personality, and then you start spiritual awakening and you're almost like, you face these shadows and you face these demons, it's really, you know, it can be really tough to accept that you aren't this person you thought you were, or you were, you know, creating yourself to be. In factual fact, you are this person and you have this side of your personality. And so in order to, you know, work through this sort of thing, your whole perception changes. The whole way you view the world and how you view yourself is completely shifted. And it is, you really have to get to grips, and you really have to process it and learn to feel comfortable with it. But then that's the thing with a spiritual awakening, it never ends. And so you're constantly on this journey, and you're constantly progressing, and you're constantly working through, you know, limiting beliefs and blocks, and you're constantly working through trauma. And so it can really become overwhelming at times. It's not always a journey that's enjoyable, or a journey that's full of positivity and high vibes. Sometimes when you're looking at other people's journeys and you fall into the trap of comparison, it can make you feel like you are even more alone. but in actual fact 10 times out of 10 the other people that are going through the same thing have experienced it as well. One thing that I have really, you know, found challenging with my own spiritual awakening is feelings of being lost. So when I, you know, wasn't as aware of these spiritual laws that I believe in and I live by, you almost live on autopilot, and you know, you don't have, you're not consciously aware of what you're doing and where life is leading you, I guess. You're just doing what society has taught you to do, or what you think your parents think you should do, and all things like that. So you almost have this plan in your life, and you're on this plan and nothing ever changes, and you're just the same person, but you're just, you know, doing the same things. But once you start to break free from those patterns and break free from the beliefs of your parents and break free from how society thinks you should be, you are now creating your own path, and you're now creating your own beliefs and your own rules to live by. And it can sometimes feel hard because you don't know where you're going, and you're having to trust that everything is working out for you. And when you have these days, or you have these moments where everything just seems overwhelming, feeling lost can also be a feeling that is something you need to work through, because you are literally having to trust this whole process, and you may not know your next steps. It's always listening, it's listening to your intuition, and it's listening to your heart. And it's not as structured as a life before, or as simple as a life before, because you have all this new awareness and you have all this new knowledge, and you're growing constantly. And because you're growing constantly, your experiences are changing and shifting all the time, and so nothing is ever as stable. But when I say that, there is a massive positive to that, because you're opening yourself up to so much more than what you were open to before. And so the experiences you attract and the growth that you go through brings tremendous change in a positive way as well, and you open up doors that you thought were impossible before, and your life completely changes. And this is the spiritual awakening that most people portray, is the up leveling and the new experiences and the new feelings and, you know, the new growth. But there can be feelings of being lost that comes with that, and feelings of not knowing where you're going or what you're doing. And it's really learning to have, like, to trust and to believe, and you've got to have this core belief that you are on the right path and you are on the right journey, and everything is working out in your favour. So if you are going through a spiritual awakening and you're experiencing, or you have experienced feelings of being lonely and alone and not understood and, you know, lost and overwhelmed and all of this, it's completely natural and it's completely normal. You are breaking the way that things have been done. You are creating a new path. You are ultimately up-leveling the whole of the collected consciousness, and you are creating a domino effect. But you know what? I'm not going to say it gets easier, but you get used to the process. You get used to the process and you become better at processing things. And so ultimately the spiritual awakening is so worth it for me. Like, whenever I have these phases now, I know that it's for a higher purpose, and I know that it's for something better. And so it just makes it so worthwhile when you have these new experiences and these new epiphanies, and life just gets richer and richer, and, you know, it just becomes all worth it. This is the truth of my spiritual awakening. This is the truth of the spiritual awakenings I have witnessed. And if you are going through the same thing, and if you are just, you know, new to this whole spiritual awakening journey, know that it's not always what people portray it to be, but you are not alone. and you can and you will get through it. And just know that your life will never be the same, but it will be so much better. Thank you so much for watching this Let's Talk episode. I feel like I went a little bit deep, but I feel like I was called to share this message with you guys this week. If you've liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Leave me a comment below if you have experienced any of these things or any other things that, you know, have been unique to your spiritual awakening. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.